Hello, I'm ArchieLuxury. Welcome to the channel. Remember, like, subscribe, and tell your circle-jerking friends about my channel. Remember, you can sponsor me on Patreon. You can advertise on my fridge. You can get a phone call with Archie for as little as $50 for an hour of my time. Today, I want to talk about why is Rolex the greatest luxury watch brand of all time. And let's be honest there, Rolex may not be the greatest watch. For horological significance, you'd say something like Patek or JEWELLERY. For ruggedness and marketing prowess, something like the Royal Oak perhaps. But Rolex, for the hoi polloi, is probably the greatest brand. If someone said to me, Archie, I want you to put $100,000 into wristwatches, safe bet buying, you'd have to go Rolex. And let's be honest, why is that so? Why is Rolex become so wanted and so fantastic? And the answer is, I think if you look at Rolex's history, since the development of the cushion case Oyster, Rolex has always gone for waterproofing. And they had that famous swimmer, Mercedes swam the channel with a Rolex on. And Rolex, yes, they had Cellini, which is a bit of a dog, but we're talking oysters. We're talking oysters, fuckers. Oysters, oyster perpetuals, oysters. Rolex has always stayed with waterproofing. And you have a look at many vintage Omegas. I mean, Omega was a great brand. At one stage, in the 60s and 70s, I would have said Omega was better than Rolex. Omega had the moon watch. What a marketing kudos that was. Omega had the Flightmaster. Much better watch than the GMT was. Omega had the Pro Prof. Probably one of the best dive watches of all time. But why did Rolex keep that market share? Why did Rolex survive and become the king of the luxury goods game? Well, the king is actually Patek, but Patek is too hoity-toity, too expensive for mere mortals to buy, and they're quite delicate. Rolex, by deciding to keep waterproof as a standard thing throughout all their oysters, you look at all the oysters, even the ladies' watches, they're all oyster perpetuals, oysters, 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 oysters. Very clever idea, that oyster waterproof case. And I know if you don't get your seals checked, there's no guarantee that water won't come in, but most people didn't take it in the pool and they just didn't service it for so many fucking years. Well, the oyster often survived. So I think it's the reason why Rolex is so intrinsic in today's society is because they're waterproof. They're long-lasting watches. Whereas Omega only kept waterproofing for certain models. Even the Constellation wasn't really waterproof. Whereas Rolex had the Datejust waterproof. The ladies Datejust waterproof. Ladies Steel Oyster waterproof. It was a no-cost option. It's like buying a car which comes standard with aircon and a radio. They took over that market. And throughout a fad of time, I mean, let's go back in time there. In the 1940s, after World War II, thin circular watches were in. The 50s, thin. Well, Rolex stuck by waterproofing. 60s comes along, waterproofing. Rolex made waterproof watches. All of them were waterproof. Even the ladies were waterproof. And from a standpoint of endurance, even if you didn't service the fucker, even if you wore the fucking thing, it had less chance of being destroyed by consumer stupidity. Rolex, by hitching onto the waterproof bandwagon, took their watches above anyone else. Even Patek, Audemars Piguet, Vacher and Constantine didn't have waterproof watches in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. That was unnecessary because they wanted to make thin watches, fuckers. Whereas Rolex wasn't a fashion statement. They were waterproof. They endured time. And that's why Rolex, I believe, became the king. Even Omega had their glory days, 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Not all of them were waterproof, and I admit Rolex did some nasty things. You know, Rolex had... Did you know Rolex had gold plating? Ugh, fuck. Yes, Rolex had gold-plated models. But, waterproofing. Waterproofing, fuckers. Waterproofing. The other thing Rolex did is they stuck with the same basic design. Brands like Cartier. I mean, Cartier in the 70s was so cool. They had the Santos, the Panther. They had some really cool models. Not very waterproof, however. And then Richemont, greedy South African firm. What did they decide to do? Well, when the Santos wasn't selling, they dropped the line and made the Santos 100. Then they brought out the Passion, and they brought out the Roadster, all these trendy, cool watches, and they dropped their base. See, Rolex always stayed with that oyster case. And unfortunately with Cartier, look at what Richemont's doing there. They are rimming customers to get them back in the door, but I don't want a Cartier. I want a fucking Rolex. I want a Rolex. Rolex. I want a Rolex. It's a bit like Nikon cameras. I'm not going to bore you if you're not a camera person, but basically, the Vietnam War made Nikon popular. The Nikon SLR killed the fancy Leicas, all these fancy cameras. The Nikon became the standard. Nikon is kind of like Rolex of today. Omega is like Canon, and Rolex won. And I gotta fucking tell you something. Rolex, waterproofing, sports watches became the new must-have. Sports watches, not faggot-sized small watches. I love gay men, by the way. I love gay men. But you know what I'm saying. I love gay men. But Rolex was very smart, very clever. Rolex did the right things. And I gotta tell you, Rolex is indestructible. Yes, they're overpriced for what they are. It's like a Mercedes-Benz. Yes, there's a lot better bang per buck out there. But there's just something about turning up in a business meeting in an E-Class. It doesn't quite cut it in a fucking Nissan Maxima. Doesn't quite cut it in a Beamer. Doesn't quite cut it in an Audi. Rolex is the Mercedes-Benz of watches, fuckers. Tell me what you fuckers think of that.
We specialize in the repair of Rolex and Patek Philippe watches. We've been doing the same thing for more than 25 years. We have Rolex technicians certified by Rolex who actually used to work for the company for many years, like if we're doing the work on the factory. We completely disassemble the watch and we put it to work like brand new condition. When you get a pre-owned watch, it's like if you're getting a brand new unit. The only difference is the money.